Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today is going to be another one of my individual scouting reports for the 2022 NBA draft. And in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at French big man Ismael Kamagate. So without any further delay, let's get straight into the video. Moving on, we do have some stats to talk about regarding Ismael, as he is 21 years old, stands at about 6 feet 11 inches, weighs about 220 pounds, and has a 7'4" wingspan. Pretty impressive physical profile for the center. He is a bit on the older side compared to a couple of the center prospects in this class. After the first couple guys, there's a lot of guys who are, of an older age, that 21, 22 year range. So Kamagate kind of fits, in that range. But compared to, I feel like a majority of prospects, he's a lot older than most of them, and I've seen a lot of first round buzz for Kamagate. In a couple of my previous mock drafts, in my only previous mock draft, I did have him mocked relatively high in the mid 20s. Amongst all the players discussed as overwhelmingly favorites to be first round picks, Kamagate is definitely on the older side. However, just looking at his height, his weight, his wingspan, I would like to see him weigh a little bit more, but only weighing 220 pounds does help him in terms of his mobility in certain aspects on the court, which we will discuss. And he does have an impressive wingspan, having a plus wingspan, at 7'4", and it definitely stands out in different aspects of the court, again, which we will discuss later. So impressive physical profile for Ismael. Regarding his stats, this is his first year playing for Paris in the French league, where he is averaging a very solid 11.8 points, 6.3 rebounds, 1.7 blocks, and a pretty alarming 1.9 turnovers per game, where he is shooting 64.8% from the field and 66.4% from the free throw line. The counting stats are not bad. He actually ranks pretty well in terms of overall stats amongst the French league. He ranks in the top echelon of players in terms of stats like total blocks or total offensive rebounds, different stats like that. So that's impressive to see that he is playing very well against a pretty solid overall league when you compare the French league compared to like the Euro League or the NBL or different leagues like that. So pretty impressive, pretty encouraging to see Ismael be able to hold his own in this level of competition. The blocks is definitely something that you like to see, and that is something that we will discuss in terms of that being a strength of his later on in the video. However, the turnovers definitely a bit alarming, and another alarming part is just the efficiency. For a rim running big, we will discuss later. You would like to see that field goal percentage be a little bit higher than just right under 65%, and also from the free throw line, 66% isn't bad for a center, but again, you would like to see it be a bit better. But you have to keep in mind that as a prospect, 66% from the free throw line as a center does suggest that you do have some growth capable in you as a shooter. Moving on to Ismael's strengths as a prospect, first up, I do want to talk about his capabilities as a lob threat on the offensive side of the floor. And I would make an argument, at least at my book, that out of all the center prospects in this class, or including all the overall prospects in this class, I believe Ismael Kamagate to be the second best lob threat, only behind Jalen Duren in this class. He just, as I mentioned here, he just has such a high catch radius due to his vertical and just his length. He's a great lob threat when he's just standing there, obviously, around the basket, just jumping off 2 feet. But I think he's also a very solid rim runner, and well, he's a rim running is part of it, but he's a very solid lob threat on the move as well. He's, again, sometimes these Paris guards will throw him passes that they can kind of seem a bit too high, a bit too out of his reach, but he's just able to go up and get these balls simply because of his length and his impressive vertical ability. So I feel like that is strength of his that will translate to the NBA level from day one, and if nothing else, should help him see immediate minutes on the court for a team that could potentially fall thin at the center position and need him to fill in minutes from day one. They can count on having a very solid lob threat in Ismael. Another part of his offensive game that I could definitely see translating from day one to the NBA level is that he's just a good finisher around the rim in general. And as I state here, he's a great finisher, specifically when he's wide open. Now, again, that might seem a bit obvious, like of course you want your center to be a great finisher when he's wide open, but I feel like that really needs to be stated with Ismael, simply because, well, we'll talk about some of his concerns later. But he's able to score on open looks around the basket, and I mean, I figured I would include that as a strength. He's a good finisher around the rim, when the shots are wide open, when he doesn't necessarily have too many defenders, trying or attempting to contest his shots. And another part of his offensive game that I really like is his free throw shooting. Well, I wouldn't say I really like. I feel like he has upside as a free throw shooter, but I feel like his form really needs a lot of work, and that's something that we will go into, in detail in the concern section of the video. But and I'm not personally the biggest fan of Ismael as a jump shooter. I've seen a lot of people state that he does have some upside as a mid-range scorer. He has shown some flashes of being, having a little post-up game in the mid-range, being able to, kind of take his pivot foot, swing it around, kind of hit a defender with a jab step, with a step back shot. But I'm not personally that big a fan of that part of his game just because of his form. And again, that's something that we will go into detail about why I don't like his form later on in the video. But simply from standing at the free throw line and shooting, I do feel like there is some upside in terms of that area of his offensive game. And then moving on to his rebounding, where I feel like he is a pretty solid rebounder. Even though he doesn't have the best of rebounding totals or averages, I feel like he's a very good contested rebounder. And, that speaks volumes for a league that is, very physical. The French or the league that he was playing for is very physical. Is the best league in France, the French basketball league. So that was very impressive to see Ismael, battle on the glass. And I thought he was a great contested rebounder in a very phrasical league. So I feel like that is a positive outlook or a positive sign for his rebounding outlook. That's the right phrasing for a positive outlook on a positive indication on his rebounding outlook at the NBA level. And I felt that he was a better offensive rebounder than he was a defensive rebounder. And I know that his per game totals, if you look at them, it's I believe he was averaging about 1.4 defensive rebounds more than offensive rebounds. But the fact that I believe Kamagate averages about 2.3 offensive rebounds compared to about like 3.8, 3.9 defensive rebounds. So again, that's a pretty good amount of offensive rebounds that he's coming down with per game. And this shows up on tape as well, where he's able to come down with these rebounds sometimes with two guys on him. Whether he's in traffic, he's able to just get up and get those balls before they are able to come down. Sometimes just because of his length and his athleticism, as we previously stated, with his capabilities as a lob threat. So that is a part of his game that I really like. And although he is a good defensive contested rebounder, I feel like he's an even better offensive contested rebounder. So again, despite the low rebounding totals, I do expect him to be a better rebounder as he continues to grow and fill out his body and continue to learn the game of basketball. Because I feel like, watching Kamagate, even though he is 21 and a lot older than a good amount of these center prospects, just watching him, I feel like he hasn't necessarily been playing basketball for too long. He has a fair amount of pro experience, but again, I don't feel that Ismael has been playing basketball since he was, a kid, for example. So I feel like him continuing to learn the game and grow as a player, IQ wise, and with his athleticism, just continue to fill out his frame. I feel like he will only become a better rebounder as he continues to age. And again, he's only 21, so acting like he's 28. It doesn't really make any sense. So again, even though he's a lot older than some of these other players, he's still only 21, so he has a lot of room to grow. However, moving on to the defensive side of the floor, where he has shown a lot of upside as a shot blocker, specifically with his right hand. Similarly to how he's able to just get off the floor on the offensive side of the floor around the rim and just kind of get to balls that he shouldn't. He's also able to do that on the defensive side of the floor. And what's really impressive about his blocks or the shots that he's just able to contest, specifically with his right hand, is just a lot of them just seem to be off pure instinct. And this kind of plays into my next part as well, where he just has great hands on the defensive side of the floor. He's able to just play passing lanes awesomely as a strong side defender. He's able to get to cross-court passes. And again, as I say here, a lot of these just seem to be pure instinct. That kind of plays into my point where, I'm sorry if you guys can hear that outside. A car just sped through. But anyways, back to the video. Kamagate, you just watching him play on the defense side of the floor, you can tell that a lot of his the turnovers that he does create, you can just tell that a lot of these are just pure instinct and they're not necessarily him, reading the floor. So I feel like that's really impressive just to see these instincts from Kamagate and be able to get off the ground so quick and be able to get to shots at an extremely efficient and effective rate, with his right hand, and the way that he's also able to play passing lanes as well, I think really bodes well for his outlook as a defender, given if he develops at the NBA level. Just having these raw instincts already intact, I think will be very enticing for NBA teams come June. He's also a very good pick and roll defender right now, which again adds to his defensive upside, especially out of guarding guards out of pick and rolls. When guards kind of come off that screen and attack downhill, Kamagate is quick enough laterally and has good enough footwork to just be able to stay with them and kind of overwhelm these guards with his size. And he's a good amount of his blocks come out of that, just guards coming off and attacking downhill off the screen, and they're just not expecting Kamagate to keep up with them, and he keeps up with them. He's sometimes even quicker than a lot of these guards in the French league. He's just able to stay with them, and then they're like, all right, they don't necessarily think, they're kind of like, all right, he's kind of like on my hip a little bit, maybe I can get like this little hook in, but no, then Kamagate will send that shot flying right back down to them. Like, no, you're not going to get that off. So again, that's very impressive to see Kamagate be able to stay with guards out of pick and roll situations. That's not something that you see out of a lot of these center prospects. So for Kamagate to have, again, it just seems like he's playing off instinct a lot of time, and that's what I really love, is that I feel like you can teach a player how to read a scheme, how to read this and read that, but to see the instincts that he has as a shot blocker, and being able to play passing lanes with just how good of hands he has overall, and just be able to keep up with guards and shut them down when they're attacking downhill off a pick and roll situation, that's not something that you see out of not only a lot of center prospects this year, but just out of a lot of center prospects in general. Moving on to some of the concerns I do have with Ismael at this current point in his development. And first up is just his finishing outside or at the rim outside of just, open layups or dunks, whether that be hook shots, little close floaters, teardrops, or even his fadeaways necessarily, even and really anything relatively close to the rim outside of just open shots or dunks. It's bad for Kamagate. I'm not gonna lie, and I think that's the main reason why his field goal percentage isn't in the low 70s. It's just because of how poor of a finisher he is. Really from anywhere outside of directly wide open shots at the rim, and that's because whether it's on his hooks, he fades away. He'll kind of throw the hook up, but then he won't necessarily extend his arm all the way. He won't even necessarily follow through. His arm will kind of be fading away. He's a bit on the light side as a center, so that leads to especially with him playing in a more physical league, that will lead to him kind of being pushed off his spots a little bit, so some of his shots end up short, especially again with him not following through on a lot of his hooks or teardrops. Also, he just lacks a lot of touch right now on a lot of these shots. And, it's very concerning. Again, I know that I stated before that he is 21, that even though he is 21, I feel that, he still has a lot of developing to do and is capable of a lot of development, simply because it just doesn't he's just kind of playing off instinct right now. It's just, you'd like to see him be a little bit farther along than he is in terms of, having, a decent, teardropper, or just being able to, a lot of times, even though I stated before that he's able to attack off the dribble, with two dribbles get to the rim on a defender, even that, he kind of fades away on his layups. It's bad right now. And at the NBA level, Ismael is not going to be tasked with doing anything with the ball in his hands. Just simply knock down wide open shots. That's it. Because outside of that, you're asking too much for Kamagate at this stage in his development. Also on the offensive side of the floor, I don't think he's a great screen setter. I've seen a lot of people say that he's a good screen setter. I just don't see it. I feel that a lot of times he doesn't necessarily make contact with the defender, and I get some of that is part and due to the scheme, because they kind of want Ishmael, when you have an athlete like that, to kind of like, roll to the basket, get the, an open look at the basket. You guys get what I'm saying. But, with Kamagate, it's just too many screens where he just doesn't really screen, the ball handler's man. Or so then it's not even really a screen. So then he'll roll a couple times, and then he won't be able to get the ball because, even if the guard's got somebody right on him. So, it's not like he just has a clear path to throw it up to Kamagate, right? So I feel that he needs to make more contact on the screens than what he does. And a lot of times now, even when he does make screens, a lot of it ends up in being an illegal screen or a foul call for Kamagate, simply because he doesn't necessarily get his footwork set. He might be leaning too much into the defender. He might kind of like ram into them a little bit, and that plays into my next part where he just lacks a lot of overall polish in his game right now. Again, as I stated, his footwork can be sloppy not only as a screen setter but overall. Again, as I mentioned before, when he does have the ball, people have stated that he has shown some upside of being able to shoot, that little post mid. He has a little bit of a mid post game, but a lot of times when he does try to face up, when he kind of turns that inside foot, he can kind of get called for a travel a lot of times. Sometimes he kind of just stumbles with the ball in his hands. Not the best of decision makers. He has shown the ability to hit open shooters, but it's not like he doesn't necessarily make any crazy passes that you're like, oh, okay, like that's a clear strength of his, right? A lot of times he will turn the ball over or kind of fumble with his footwork and whatnot. So his game just overall just lacks a lot of polish, and he's just a raw prospect on the offensive side of the floor right now. And again, the jump shot is something that I stated that we would talk about later, and here we're going to talk about it now. Just with his overall form on his shot, I'm really struggling to love it or even really like it, really. His shooting hand, his elbow's kind of bent when he shoots, so his you guys kind of can't really see. His shooting arm is kind of like this a lot of times, so his elbow's kind of bent, so he doesn't really necessarily get all that much arc on his shot. And then his guide hand kind of like fades away too, so it's he's not necessarily getting any guide on the ball. He's not necessarily extending his arm, so again that hurts the arc in his shot. Not following through a lot of times on the shot, so I just don't see unless he fixes again, bends or fully extends. Excuse me, not bends, but fully extends his shooting arm, fixes the guide hand, and just gets a lot more reps like that. I don't really necessarily see him being anything as a shooter. So again, that's just something, a lot of things that just need to be worked out in terms of his form at the NBA level. And then again, as I stated before, even though he is a pretty solid contested rebounder, 6 rebounds is not going to cut it. I'd like to see him average an extra rebound or two wouldn't help. And again, as I stated before, with that 220 pounds playing in a physical league like he does, even if he is a good contested rebounder on both sides of the floor, he can get pushed around again just because of that 220 pounds that he is carrying. So that is something that he could work on as well. Working on more so sealing off defenders around him rather than just relying on his length and his vertical prowess to grab rebounds, which again plays into my previous points where Kamagate is a guy that is kind of playing off a lot of instinct right now, and that's another example of that. And then right now I think he's also not a great weak side defender, as his awareness isn't necessarily the best at times. And again, as I state here, navigating through traffic and kind of like the job of the big man at certain times is kind of direct the guards, especially in pick and roll situations. And I feel like Kamagate can definitely struggle with that at times at this point in his development. Moving on to Ismael Kamagate's outlook, or his looking at his translation to the NBA level. First up, I do want to discuss his floor, which I see being a G League rotation player, and that is simply because of how raw he is on the offensive side of the game, outside of anything, around the basket or wide open around the basket. Even though he is an extremely impressive, lob threat and vertical floor spacer, just his inability to really do anything with the ball in his hands outside of that, his shooting struggles, and given the fact that he is a bit raw on the defense side of the floor, again, as I say here, even though he's shown a lot of impressive things on tape, given with his defensive instincts, that's just not going to be enough. And I don't think he's going to be able to read and process the NBA game on the defensive side of the floor well enough to start off his career to really warrant him seeing minutes. I think he's going to be a G League player, and whatever team drafts him is going to see him as a developmental piece. They're going to get him in the G League, get him a lot of reps, have him with their staff, really working on him, really working on his IQ and just his footwork and whatnot, and working on the consistencies throughout his game, maybe rebuilding his shot. Maybe if we have another virus outbreak and whatever team drafts him thin at center, then he'll get brought up. Maybe if he ends up with a bad team, they're not really competing for too many games at the end of the season, maybe they'll bring him up to get a look at him, against NBA level competition. But this is the floor for Ismael Kamagate. It is a G League player, and again, I don't see it being an NBA rotation piece. And for the median outcome, I believe Ismael Kamagate throughout his career will just be a good, solid backup big and rotation piece for an NBA team. I think he's going to be a decent rebounder, along with his vertical spacing, but he just has so much to work to do in terms of just his touch. He just lacks touch right now outside of just, footwork and just everything else with his offensive game. So I think that is definitely going to hold him back, from being, a long-term starter, at the NBA level. And then also and then I think he could be in this median outcome a solid defensive center who does a great job of containing guards outside of pick and rolls and is a good shot blocker. So that is a quality rotation piece at the NBA level. However, his ceiling, I do believe it to be a quality starting NBA center. So not just a good center, but a quality one, where I feel like the technique improves. Not going to be anything awesome or anything like that, but just good. Just because he just has so much work to do there that expecting him to become amazing in that aspect, it's just not tangible. So I feel like if that improves as well as the free throw numbers improve, that would allow him to be on the floor for 29 to 30 to potentially even more minutes per game for whatever team he would hit this ceiling with. And then also you combine that with his defensive versatility, where he's able to guard pick and rolls effectively, switch onto guards for possessions, for certain possessions here and there, while also being able to disrupt passing lanes as well, and be a very good shot blocker at the rim. You're looking at an extremely high quality center for whatever team drafts him. But for him to reach the for him to reach the ceiling, it's going to be a while. He's going to be a project player for whatever team drafts him, and and that shows. In my comparisons, I do have him, showing shades of Jaren Jackson Jr. I was kind of struggling to find, an exact comparison of Kamagate just because of the strengths and weaknesses in his game. So I kind of said shades of Jaren Jackson Jr. defensively, simply because, Jaren Jackson Jr. is one of the elite rim protectors in this league. I feel like Kamagate at his ceiling can become that, or a poor man's version of that. And also I think Jaren Jackson Jr. does a pretty good job out on the perimeter, being able to make stops. And I feel like that is something, especially in pick and roll situations, which I think Kamagate can do a good job of as well. And Jaren Jackson Jr. just has a high motor on the defensive side of the floor and does a great job cutting off passing lanes and deflecting passing lanes, which again is a strength of Kamagate's as well. So I see that a little bit, even though they're not necessarily the same, in terms of their physical capabilities, just the overall, strengths of Jaren Jackson on the defensive side of the floor. I could see Kamagate being that having similar strengths as at his ceiling. So I would say more of like a poor man's Jaren Jackson Jr. on the defensive end of the floor, while also being, a bit of a Rudy Gobert on the offensive side of the floor, where Rudy Gobert is probably the best defender in the league. However, he does lack some touch on the offensive side of the floor. Doesn't really have all that many moves. Even if his teammates, it's been made a big thing that Donovan Mitchell and doesn't necessarily pass the ball to Rudy Gobert all that much. The Utah Jazz offense doesn't necessarily prioritize getting Gobert touches. Even when he does, he's not perfect. He can't fumble the ball. Doesn't necessarily have the best of hands. Doesn't really necessarily have all that many moves to go to that he can get down and memorize. So I feel like Kamagate does have that as well, as we talked about, where outside of just easy wide open shots at the rim or open dunks, he can't really do much on the offensive side of the floor. So that's why I state a springier Rudy Gobert on the offensive side of the floor. So all in all, Kamagate, raw prospect, but median outcome, he should become a decent NBA player. The fact that he's just not going to be able to do much outside of just be a vertical spacer on the offense side of the floor is definitely going to hinder him. But his instincts, as a shot blocker, and being able to just play passing lanes with his hands, and being able to guard and overwhelm guards on the perimeter, especially at a pick and roll situations, is definitely enticing. And currently I have Kamagate as a the middle to early second round pick. I have him at the bottom half of my top 30. So I have him in the 35 to 40 range on my big board as of the making of this video. And that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about Ismael Kamagate in the comment section below. Do you guys think I rated him properly? Do you guys think that since I am a bit lower on him than the consensus, do you guys agree with the overall consensus in him being, a late first round pick? Let me know what you guys think about Kamagate in the comment section below. And aside from that, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have subscribed, please share the video with a friend. I want to keep growing the channel, keep growing the community that we have here on the channel. So again, that's the end of the video, guys. Again, thank you so much if you made it this far. And that's the end of the video, guys. Please take care and have a blessed day, and peace.